Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention. My name is Ken Smith. I'm the mayor of the fine little city of Vader, and it's my distinct honor and privilege to initiate this public meeting. And I would officially call it to order, as we are accustomed to doing at 6 o'clock. We are, in fact, recording this meeting so that if you have friends and neighbors who weren't able to attend, that you can access it on the city's website. So we hope that you avail yourself of that opportunity. We're especially grateful to have each and every one of you here. Seriously, this is an important public meeting for us as elected officials of the city of Vader. We've been at this particular challenge for, I would say, 4 or 5 years, because we've been informed by the Department of Ecology, as I'm sure you're well aware, that the city of Vader has been mandated to fix the waste treatment problems that our peer lagoon system is confronting us. We've been out of compliance for a number of years. So we're engaging in the heavy lifting that is required to fix such expensive, complicated problems. But we're at the point now where this public meeting is designed to bring all of the individuals, not just residents of Vader, but others who may be impacted by the alternative that the Vader City Council is considering. And so it's important for you to know what is happening, and we want your input and feedback. We're not operating in the dark, behind the barn, smoke-filled room. We're doing our best to maintain every step involved in this complicated process, front and center, with an attitude of transparency. So we're very pleased to have you here. We look forward to doing the best we can tonight to addressing any questions and concerns you might have. And if we can't answer them tonight, we don't have the information available to answer the questions, we give you our assurances that we will get them for you. It's appropriate, I think, that I make some introductions so you know who the official presenters are. Like I've indicated, I'm the mayor, Ken Smith, and we have 2 members of our city council with us tonight. There are normally five members of our council, but if we have 3, we would have a quorum. So we wanted to avoid that, but we have 2. I don't want you to strain your necks or anything, but we have Joe Shy, who's a member of the city council, seated behind you. And Andy Wilson, a distinguished former mayor, currently seated as a member of the city council. We want to thank you, Andy.
31 years.
31 years, yeah. A war veteran. We have a member of the press here, Stephen Floyd. So he's always here to ensure that I'm on my best behavior. Not really. That's a big job. We have Jill Nielsen, our city clerk, who, as I indicated, will be recording the session in 15 minutes. But last but most importantly, and not least, we have Kathy Reed, who's a state employee with the Washington State Department of Commerce. She focuses on infrastructure utility needs of small communities. And she has been marching side by side with us throughout this entire process. And she's an adopted resident of Vader. We've given her the key to the city so many times she can keep it. She can have it. But we do appreciate her expertise, and believe me, she's an advocate for all of us with Washington State Department of Commerce. And we have Al Bollinger, who's a facility engineer, a representative of the Washington State Department of Ecology, a noted guru of all things involving He gets his hands dirty.
I'm number one in the number two business.
Sorry.
I digress. Okay,
No, but he is kind of responsible for our area. And so he's the one who actually is boots on the ground, an employee of the Department of Ecology. And I must put a plug in for ecology. You know, we all have preconceived notions, sometimes well-founded and sometimes not, on the professional value of state entities, bureaucracies. But I have to stand before you in my 8th year as mayor of this community that our state employees have been extraordinary in their patience and their willingness to accommodate the financial needs and challenges of the residents in our area. They've just been wonderful in that regard. I'll spare you the lengthy explanation of that, but I hope you will be. We've been very pleased with the service provided to us by our state officials. And last but not least, we have with us Chris Kelsey, who's an engineer with BHC Consultants. It's the engineering company that is we selected, the City Council has approved to oversee all of the engineering facets of the alternative solution for a project you will be hearing about tonight. So with that, with those introductions, I have the easy part. Once we begin, I will be seated in the back, but I hope to entertain whatever questions you might have. We'd like to keep this meeting within an hour or so, just so that my philosophy is that mind can comprehend only as long as the seat can endure. I know the seats aren't that covered. So our presenters are going to be concise, but they're not going to go so fast that they outrace your question. So if a question arises, again, get your attention, get their attention, because it's a meeting for you. So we want you to feel like you're being heard. Okay, any questions? Seeing none, then I would turn the time over to Kathy Reed, who will begin, and we'll follow the agenda.
Thanks, Mayor. Did everybody get a copy of, there's 2 handouts. There's the colored one, which is going to be Chris's presentation, and then there's an agenda. If you would turn your attention to the page 2 of the agenda, I'm going to give you a little bit of context for this project. And as Mayor Smith said, I'm not a regulator, I'm not a funder. Ecology did ask me in 2003 to assist the city however I could in the quest for an upgraded wastewater treatment system. So I think Andy's maybe the only one in the room who's been working on this project longer than me. The city has a responsibility to comply with its wastewater permits and to upgrade its wastewater treatment plant. It's been a long effort looking for something that's affordable for the community and acceptable to the community, and I wanted to just let you know kind of where we are in the process. And start out by saying the city's under order by Ecology to upgrade its wastewater treatment facilities. So clear back in 2004, there was the first planning effort. It was a general sewer plan / wastewater facilities plan. What these types of plans do is they look at your existing system and then they look at alternatives, different ways that you can possibly meet the standards that you're required to meet to protect the environment and keep the water clean. So there were some recommendations made in that one. There was a little bit of construction work done. They replaced a sewer main, a little bit of upgrades to the lagoons. And then there was kind of a hiatus for a while, trying to see if some of the work done in replacing some of the collection system reduced some of the flows to the system, or to the wastewater treatment plant. And for other reasons, the city was focusing on other things. It was a while before we got back to it in 2009. There was an update to that facilities plan. And again, it looked at 3 treatment plant alternatives, and at that point, they even were talking about, well, what if we could build a pipe clear to Winlock and use their wastewater treatment plant? So looked at all of that as an alternative. None of those turned out to be financially feasible. Some of those cost estimates were like $8, $9, $10 million, and everybody said, that's ridiculous, we're not going for that. In 2011, there was another cost estimate of those same alternatives. In 2012, we were still kind of talking with Winlock, and we did something called an I&I assessment, looking at the condition of the collection system, seeing if a lot of clean rainwater was getting in there, and what can we do to get rid of some of that? Because there's so much, if there's so much water going to the plant that you can't treat it, and it's only rainwater, we want to get all of that out that we can. Along those lines, the city did get a grant to replace some of the collection system. You might have seen some of that work underway recently. They lined some manholes and starting to do some work with the side sewer lines in people's yards. And there's going to be round 2 of that coming up this spring. So that was all grant funded. So far it's been mostly grant funded, a little bit of loan funding. So that's been good. Then the city was approached a few years ago by a company with an experimental technology. Ecology was gracious in letting them try that out, see if that was a more affordable way to go. That technology did not work out, unfortunately, and so we went back to the planning effort. The city does now have a grant and loan from Ecology to do some planning work. They hired a brand new consultant, BHC Consultants, and this time we said, okay, let's really try to not just recreate the wheel, put new cost estimates on the same old thing. Let's try and think of some new ways to solve this problem. So right now, we are in phase 1 of this planning effort. So again, Chris has been working with the city and with Ecology on the facilities plan update. And he's going to go into more detail with that, and that's what the slideshow will be about. Once we have an approved plan, once the environmental review work is done, once anything else pre-construction or planning related is done, then we already have money available for the design phase. Once the design phase is done, that's when we would go for some construction funding. And Chris will talk a little bit more about that, but just so you don't have to take a lot of notes, page 3 lists what's coming up next. So again, going to complete some of those collection system improvements with the grant this year, update the plan, adopt the plan, begin design, and then go for construction. So we're still a couple of years out, a year or 2 at best, out from construction, but we have a plan of how things are going along. So like I said, I just wanted to give you some context for where we are now in the process and let you know that this didn't just start last year. We've actually been working on it for 12 years, 13, 10, 12 years. So is there any question about the work that's been done so far? All right, then Chris, I'd like to turn it over to you to explain where we are in this, plan.
So I put my cards out late, but I think with the approval of the city, and to echo one of the things that the mayor said at the beginning, it's not the city's intent to try to kind of railroad a project down your throats. They want to be transparent. There are limitations to city staffing, and so to that extent, take my business card, and if you want to call me directly, because you want to have more up-to-date information and ask questions, I'm available, so please take that opportunity. I have 18 slides here. I'm going to push through them, the first 13 of which I presented at a council meeting back in the fall. But I'd like to go through it again, because for those of you that weren't able to attend that, it really presents the impetus for why we're going with the alternative that's before us right now that we're trying to pursue. So Kathy spoke about this a little bit, but again, the project catalyst, The lagoon system has been under the watch of the Department of Ecology for gosh, 12 years now. And so there are some recurring issues with meeting discharge permit requirements. There is also every municipality, especially in Lewis County, must plan for, under the Growth Management Act, for growth. And so the Lewis County has a comprehensive plan. Vader is required for its component of growth. And so as you take on these improvements, when you're looking at these improvements, you have to accommodate growth so that the improvements and the capital that you invest in that isn't just done tomorrow. It's going to take you for a while. Kathy mentioned that there is funding, pre-construction funding for both planning and design purposes. There's a timeline on that. That needs to be spent, and the terms of that grant loan are very favorable, so it makes sense to move forward on this and try not to dawdle into another round. Kathy mentioned the developmental technology. And what's turned out to be the biggest catalyst here is some of the receiving water issues associated with Olacqua Creek and just its natural size, which is small. And I'll go into that a little bit more. So, as I mentioned, planning for growth, there's a 20-year planning horizon that's necessary. And what we've done here is there are population and from population flow projections based on existing data and trends that you make. And so what I want to point out here is that the design year is 2035, a 20-year planning horizon. And you can see that we have basically 100,000 gallons a day of average flow. But as Kathy alluded to, Vader's system is not yet tight, and so there's a lot of infiltration inflow during wet weather events. And so what we will see, and what we see in the records, is that there's kind of a peaking, a spiking of those flows during the wet weather events, and we need to accommodate that with our design. And so for certain facilities within the treatment plant, you need to actually design those facilities for as much as the peak hour, not all, but more commonly we're designed for average or maximum day. So the current permit has a capacity associated with it, and when we do those planning level projections and that capacity is shown as if it's going to be exceeded, what that necessitates is you re-look at the receiving water body where your effluent's being discharged. And so that was a part of our study. It's called a mixing zone analysis. And what we did is we had a sub-consultant that's done this all along these tributaries. And what we directed him to do is look at it for two locations, currently for Olacqua Creek and for Cowlitz River. And this is really what's developed as a driver for the project. And again, primarily it's because compliance is based on kind of a low flow condition. And of course, that happens to be when the fish run. And so to maintain what's called the beneficial use associated with the receiving water body, we have to meet very stringent water quality standards. And so just because Olacqua Creek at the end of summer has really just a trickle of flow, we're forced into trying to treat to very fine levels, which is very costly. And so what I want you to see is in the comparative columns, you can see that what we would expect for a permit in Olacqua Creek, specifically copper here, those are about the lowest limits in the state that I've seen, and it would be very challenging and very cost intensive to meet those. Whereas at the Cowlitz River, when we looked at that, because it's a larger water body and it's more balanced by larger flows throughout the course of the year, the discharge capacities that we are projecting, you can see that we wouldn't anticipate a permit limit for any of those constituents. And I can kind of talk to you about each of these and what their impacts on the aquatic life are, if you so desire, individually. So what we did is we looked at a number of alternatives, and these are all associated with treatment alternatives and kind of package systems that are designed to polish the water, and produce the water quality of this thing's acceptable to the receiving water. And as Kathy said, this has been done before in 2004 and 2009. So what we tried to do is enter some new alternatives that hadn't been looked at yet and that we thought might be a little more cost effective. And I can go into the details of these, but we looked at quite a few for Olyquaw Creek. And in general, what I want to say is that most of these require pouring more concrete, more structure, more equipment, and process design, as opposed to what would be required for the Cowlitz River, where we kind of focused on working with the physical elements of the lagoon itself. And so these are for the three of the five different alternatives associated with the Olyquaw Creek alternatives. All I want you to observe here is that kind of the dark shaded line represents what is what would be a part of the improvements, and really I want you to notice the trend that there's a lot here. That you can see there's a lot of structure being built and a lot of things going on here that all equates to cost and also equates to ongoing operation and maintenance. And here are the other two. Again, the same thing. The last component of Olyquaw Creek, again, is that there would be additional equipment systems or treatment systems to meet kind of those unique parameters that's necessitated by the overflows of Olyquaw Creek. And so we're looking at another chemical system to buoy the alkalinity to make sure that ammonia is removed and nitrification goes to completion. We'd actually need to cool the water during portions of the year. So basically a refrigerant that cools the temperature of the effluent before it enters Olyquaw Creek. And another chemical system in combination with filtration to get the copper concentrations down to such a very small level. So then conversely, we looked at the Cowlitz River, and this is what our recommended alternative is in the end. And I'll just quickly go through it. There are three existing lagoon cells here. Right now, this lagoon cell is kind of rectangular. But what we are showing as being a part of this work is, in essence, redoing the inlet structure with improved screening that also allows a larger capacity. Taking the existing lagoon cell, relining it, and just adding some additional aeration equipment that's going to make the process more effective. Digging out the second lagoon to make it deeper so that the settled solids that are crucial to removal to sufficient levels before you discharge can occur more effectively. And then it's really just disinfecting it through a new larger capacity disinfection chamber, putting it in a wet well structure, and pumping it out to the Cowlitz River. And so in a report, there was a graphic shown that really when we developed this, it was primarily to fill in the blanks for capital costs associated with these alternatives. And so really what we did in making these alignments, there was not much more thought than let's try to stay within right-of-way and get an appropriate lineal footage along a route that might be constructible. And so really what we tried to do is stay within right-of-ways. And then once we got east of West Side Highway, and we realized we're all on private property, that it would be nice if you could follow existing road that's already been cleared and put a pipe in there and then restore that surface. So not much thought went into it other than that. Again, it was for the purposes of developing costs per lineal foot of that pipe. And so when you added in that, and these costs are based on kind of the shortest route alternative going down Enchantment Lane, but again, this is just for the purposes of developing costs. You can see some of the alternatives. These top three are all associated with going to the Cowlitz River. And so really the takeaway point of this is that this chosen alternative, which we've recommended, you can see the capital cost is much less because even though what we've estimated to be about 8,000 feet of pipe from the existing lagoons all the way to the Cowlitz River, The cost of that is more than compensated by the additional treatment costs that would be necessary if you were to look at one of these alternatives for staying on site going to Omaha Creek. Sure.
I'm assuming that you've looked into it already, but you notice where the pipe comes out and goes into the callus, all that is wetland. Okay, so what do you plan on doing to wetland ecology-wise and dumping this into a piece of stream there that dries up in the summer and catches every trap that comes down the creek, logs, snags, whatever, and stays there. And you can't get in there and clean that because the fishery won't allow it. So you're all in that, say you can't use none of this, those two areas, which I live on, it's one of them. But anyway, you can't get to them because of wetlands to start with, and then one's gonna be either below or above our water that comes in, our drinking water. Okay, so let's just say from those two red lines, one that goes out here, yeah, put that back up. Okay, both of those, Enchantment Lane, okay, and then you go down to Fir Grove. You got two of them going in the river.
Right.
All that from point A to point B, you can't use it. It's wetland, you have to do something to it. And you got an island there that dries up. And what ecology will allow you for fisheries, that's a no-no. You can't even spit in that stuff right now. We can't fall a tree into that creek without getting sued by the ecology. I mean, somebody's gonna nail it. And you guys aren't no different than, that's very nasty when it comes to ecology, when it comes to fisheries. So, where would you think you'd have to go? You gotta go way up below, which is down this way, primary alignment there, that one there, in Chamonix. You'd have to come and go south, detour and go over in other people's other than our property.
So,
right or wrong?
everything's on the table in terms of an alignment, absolutely. To the extent that you point out wetlands, wetlands are cataloged at Lewis County, and the city of Vader has some mapping as well. I'm unaware of any currently delineated wetlands along those streets.
There is.
Okay, but certainly what I can tell you is that the logical next step that will occur is that a biologist would be a part of kind of this reconnaissance for looking at the different lines, and they'll go out there and they'll delineate any wetlands that are not delineated. That's a part of our job.
And the second part on your easements that you have, are you thinking that they're your easements or China Valley's easements or the private easements?
No,
Just like the road?
no,
It's private.
It would be private. That's private property, so the easements would be obtained from the private property.
Right.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. I'm Dave Wesson. We spoke a couple times.
Yes, I do.
I'm just curious, your proposed budget for this project, I don't believe is accurate. Because
Okay.
when we spoke on the phone, I brought up several things that you were unaware of. For instance, it's a slide area, which you suggested would greatly increase the cost right there, because the pipe would have to be engineered differently. It's a private one-lane easement. It's not really meant for heavy traffic or big vehicles.
Yeah.
And then you're coming down the road into the river, and as Gene pointed out, dumping directly in front of an island. And between the island and the bank is about 80 feet during the summer of 3 to 4 inches of water that moves very, very slowly. So not only does that not reflect the true cost of this project, but then also you're putting a toxic sewer line through a known slide area. So is there going to be an insurance company that's going to insure this? When there is a break and the soils are contaminated, who's going to be responsible for cleaning it up and paying for it? And then the people who frequent that area of the river, it's a recreational area. You have children and dogs and fishermen. If somebody gets sick, who's going to be responsible for that?
And those are all valid concerns that, as we move forward, absolutely have to be addressed. The slide area, we have a geotechnical engineer that will be introduced during the next phase of the project, and he did review some mapping that suggests that maybe the slide areas that have been mapped to date are a little further north, but that's certainly a part of his evaluation that needs to
That whole
occur.
area is a slide area. We all have pictures. We can show you dozens of slides that have happened.
Is this along the riverbanks? then?
Absolutely. And the hill itself,
Right.
every time somebody digs in that ground,
Right.
we end up with a slide. There's always issues. So this is, like I'm saying, I think the cost of this project is going to be a lot higher than what you're suggesting.
Okay, so the cost that's in now is based on using a type of pipeline construction material that's fused such that the whole pipe as a length acts as one continuous system, and that's one way to mitigate that. You know, there's lots of pipes where they are trucked in 20-foot segments, and you kind of stick them together and fit them together.
Oh, I appreciate that, but all pipes leak
Right.
eventually,
I break.
or break,
So-
especially when they're in earth that's moving.
Well, I'm sorry, so
No, I'm just asking how you're presenting these figures, and you don't even have all the facts in yet. Have you done an environmental impact study?
no, certainly the biologist that's part of our team is going to be introduced at the next phase of the project. That biologist will be required to do a biological assessment that studies the impacts of the river and the aquatic life, the beneficial uses associated with that river. So the design will follow the recommendations of that effort.
What about the negative impacts to property values?
Certainly is for the property owners, that's a consideration that should be put on the table.
Could I add something, Chris?
Sure.
I mentioned that we're in the planning phase right now, and then there'll be design and construction. So for planning level cost estimates, you don't always have exactly what the cost is gonna be. The idea in the plan is to figure out close as you can, to figure out which is the least expensive alternative both to build and to maintain in the long run. So even if and then once the preferred alternative is selected, that's the one in the design phase where you really do a lot more work to look exactly what the costs are. And of course, as you know, I mean, it doesn't matter what we put on paper, it's gonna cost what it costs when we get the bids from the contractors, right? So we do our best to estimate, but there's a planning level estimate, and then when you get to design, it's a lot, it's probably a lot closer.
That's a good point, and just to that end, one moment. Typically, at the conceptual level, what we include in our estimates are larger contingencies, just because at this point, we haven't gone out and done the site work and evaluated the site. And so we hope that those contingencies, which at the conceptual level, we typically add is 30% on top of all the line items added in. And our hope is that we don't, as we develop the design and do that field work and that site work and know what the conditions are to a better degree, that we don't encounter those things, and that contingencies, we know more about the project, goes down and the cost goes down. But sometimes, as you point out, we encounter things that say, well, that contingency was worthwhile there.
Well, my concern here is that you're looking at the least expensive option here, and you're gonna run with it. And if you haven't done all your research yet, then you don't actually know if that's the most expensive.
Sure. And I can tell you that in comparison to the lowest costs associated with staying in Omaquah Creek, this again, as you rightfully point out, is based on an alignment that would be pretty opportune. It's pretty direct. If in fact that needs to slide, I can tell you that this would maintain its lowest cost, even if that were to veer a couple of thousand feet one way or the other. There's kind of that sensitivity where we think, we're pretty confident this would remain as the lowest cost alternative, even if some of these unknowns played out. I'm sorry, I'll get to you in 1 second, but I know you had your hand
This
raised.
is a question mainly for the two gentlemen that brought up these points, and I'm ignorant of a lot of this, and the first to admit it. If the creek were picked instead of the river, would these problems still exist with the slides and the things that you're concerned about? So are we damned if we do, damned if we don't? In other words, if we went to the river, these problems exist that you brought out,
Yes.
well, so if they went to the creek, would these problems still exist, or would they not be an issue?
I can only speak to the Cowlitz, I'm not familiar with the Old.
And on the Cowlitz, it was still, it slides all along the shoreline. We have numerous pictures over the years.
Does the
Okay,
creek
and-
do the same thing? That's what I'm asking. Okay, I'm done. So I'm trying to figure out
Sure.
my mind.
And what I can offer is that obviously a geotechnical review, all that information is upcoming, needs to be performed.
Okay. Another alternative, and it may not work at all, but I'll just put it out there just to be quick about it. If I understand it correctly, the reason why it's so expensive in the Olicquah is because of the small volume and trace elements that are extremely hard to get rid of. So my question is it possible to bring in water mixed with the effluent that you are injecting into the existing Olicquah system into the river, sufficient enough to lower those percentages down
Just
so it's not diluted down, and also decrease the temperature? Because the realization is the Cowlitz River is 10 to 15 degrees colder than the Olicquah in the summertime, at least. If you ran a pipe into the Cowlitz River, which is effectively the same thing you're doing on the first thing, instead of mounting the pump at this end, you mount the pump at that end, and you pump water from the Cowlitz in, mix it, and then inject it into the Olicquah Creek. Can you get your percentages down low enough where you don't have to do these extra packages? Is it possible?
It's an interesting thought. There'd certainly be some challenges associated with taking water out of the Cowlitz.
Yeah, you'd have to get permits to do that.
Yeah.
But effectively, the only difference is you do have to have a deep water intake, somewhere that can be cleaned out. And effectively, you're moving the water less than 5 miles from where you're taking it out to where it goes back in. So as far as ecology and as far as transferring of large volume of water, it's insignificant. You only got a 5-mile stretch, it even affects slightly. Just a thought.
Yeah. Al, have you ever seen anything like that proposed?
I haven't. I couldn't quote the regulations that might cover that off the top of my head, but I will have to investigate that, but I've never seen it done.
Yeah, we're in a position where you gotta think outside the box, or basically this town is going to not be able to afford the system. We might as well all give up our properties and walk away. Because that is the choice. We either solve this problem or we all just give up the town.
We're working to solve the problem in an affordable way.
This has been a problem with the wastewater treatment plant long before 2003. And I know Andy has worked on it for many years, and I know back in the 90s, you know, in the summertime, the lagoons get very, right, you know, and so one of the things in looking at this, you have the design increasing the population, I mean, for growth management.
Right.
And my understanding is, you know, part of that is the Enchanted Valley development, that they're trying to make that a bigger area out there. And wouldn't it make sense that instead of looking at the population increasing, is, you know, like, they do moratoriums, if they can't fix the problem they already have and have had for many, many years, why would they want to stretch this out and allow more people to hook up? You know, I mean, it just doesn't make sense, because it has been an ongoing problem. And it's like they need to fix that problem before they even allow more people into the city or in Shannon Valley, which is included in the growth management plan.
Right.
And so it just makes sense, speaking for myself, to get that fixed and not let others build until it's taken care of. You know, and not go with this big expense for the city.
Yeah, that's certainly moratoriums are a policy decision.
Surely, I'm not sure I entirely capture the essence of the observation, but if the city of Vader had our druthers, we wouldn't be trying to expend $3.4 million. It's we have 650 residents in this little community. We're comparable in size to the city of Toledo, for example. And you're probably all aware that they are already in construction of a waste treatment facility. It was one of the other alternatives that we had on the table. And I think their total is going to be over $9 million for 650 residents. But my point is that we're not given an option. We are a code city, and if you are a code city and you want to maintain your status as a city, you have a waste treatment plant that cities, they have these sorts of utilities, you're required to have it. The Department of Ecology is the one who's issued the order that gives us no alternative. So we could pretend that we could just ignore the problem and do nothing, or we can embrace the reality that as a city with an urban growth area, of which the Enchanted Valley residents on the west side of East Side Highway are part of, and we want to be futuristic. And if we want to embrace the reality of that there's an economy of scale to help pay for the system, we have no alternative but to embrace one of those, and the lagoon upgrade is the least expensive. It's 1/3 as expensive as the city of Toledo's, for example.
So I just, before we get too far with the 3.4, that was kind of comparing apples to apples on alternatives. It did not include disinfection and so we're looking at a project cost of 4.8 right now.
Yes.
So just, go ahead, sorry. Okay, I got a question while you were on that topic.
Yeah.
So if Toledo opted to go with a $9 million plan, they're not dumping into the Cowett Center? What's the difference there? You said the people were about the same amount.
They are.
Okay, so the people are about the same amount. Why did they opt to go with a $9 million and we opted to go with a 3? I'm just curious.
Because we are hypersensitive to the ultimate costs that will be on the user. Their rates, we will end up with utility rates as far as our sewer is concerned that we are confident will be significantly lower than the city of Toledo. And if you went to any of their meetings, you would have discovered that it was highly emotional and highly charged meetings. A lot of residents were extremely upset, and you've seen, I'm sure you're sensitive to the rates in the city of Wenlock, for example. Their system cost over $12 or $16 million, something like that. And now the sewer rates are over $130, $140 a month.
Rates in the state that are well
So this reflects our determination to be as cost effective as we can possibly be. And that's why it's taken a lot longer than probably would normally have been the case. So that's my response. That was a good question. Thank you.
The other thing I want to point out is one of the reasons that for us, this alternative, working with the lagoons, seemed right to us is that not only is the capital the lowest, but if you look at the anticipated annual O&M, which is basically a product of the labor necessary to manage the equipment and operate it, the chemical costs associated with the chlorine for disinfection and anything else you might need to help the process, the biological process, and the power. And as you get to some of these more mechanically inclined systems, you can see that the annual O&M component there requires not only a lot more of those three components, but kind of a heightened sophistication to the operations, which I think Vader's just not ready for right now and really can't afford. So you can see from a 20-year life cycle cost that the disparity grows between those numbers.
And Chris, something important about that is you can get grant loan money for the capital costs. You can't get it for O&M costs. That comes straight from the rates. So it's-
I have a question. So, I thought her question was, are we gonna have to pay to have a sewage big enough to handle Enchanted Valley? So we're gonna pay for Enchanted Valley's improvements to ours until they start getting their sewer bill? And who's gonna pay for the infrastructure and the sewer pipe going to the lagoons from Enchanted Valley?
Yeah, and that's something that, in terms of the improvements on the lagoon site, there's kind of means to accommodate. Whenever you do a design project, it needs to accommodate a range of flows. The initial years are more towards existing levels, but you need to, again, because you're planning for at least 20 years, that equipment should last at least 20 years. What you want to do is maybe look at phasing the installation of that equipment or phasing some of the cells. In the case of these lagoons, the solution we've done, really the lagoon volume will accommodate both ends of that spectrum, but what we can do is kind of use control of the motor speed to, in the initial years, consume less energy and fit the application for lower flow levels. As it applies to the pipe going to the river, you can look at scaling back a pipe size and a couple of dollars per lineal foot based on with or without Enchanted Valley, and it might mean the difference in a pipe size, and you can look at that, but I'm going to say the cost is negligible, and if in fact within 20 years that is realized, that Enchanted Valley flow, to go back and put in a second pipeline is cost prohibitive. So we can look at those differences, but my thought is that, and I think for this, for the design criteria and the flow levels, I think we're estimating still just an 8-inch pipe. So I don't think there's much scalability for
And how many lift stations along
just
that?
one. It would be a pump station on the lagoon site, and that pumps all the way to the high point, and then we'll gravity down to the river.
Could I add in one thing about the costs? The city has something called a new hookup fee or a service connection fee, something like that, which once this project is done, they will recalculate so that when new users do come onto the system, they pay their fair share. If it's done correctly, it recognizes that some people have been paying on it all along, and in order for them to hook up, you don't want it to be so high that people can't afford it, but it helps address that concern of if people come on later, that they pay their fair share for that.
Well, you're directing that to what I was saying is, if, my understanding that, I was involved in the growth management plan, and so I knew Enchanted Valley was included in that growth management plan. And so for the city to make revenues off of Enchanted Valley, they would be able to run their sewer lines out there and get more revenue. Well, I don't think that my question was answered about if you can't fix the problem that is initially there and has been there for eons, then why would you want to let more people add on to it if this plan isn't gonna go? Does that make sense?
They have to do something now for the existing population. They're under order to do something now for the existing population.
Because it's code city.
Because they have a national pollutant discharge elimination
And
system
they've been
permit,
at,
and they're violating that permit.
and that also comes into play where they have been letting more and more people move into the city.
No, maybe we didn't address the
There-
moratorium. No, there
yeah,
aren't.
there's-
We haven't had to.
They haven't had new sewer
New
hookups
hookups.
for years.
There was, back in 1994, I believe, there was a population of like 400 people. Just right under 400 people.
Yeah, moratorium is more recent.
Right,
So,
that's right.
you know, they keep getting more, and maybe not now, but then you, just keep adding, and the problem's just gonna get bigger. And then, the question I had for you was, you talk about where, this pipeline is, 8-inch pipeline is gonna go down Enchantment Lane, is what you're proposing. Goes down Enchantment Lane, and it is straight until you get to a certain point,
Right.
and then there's like an 80-foot drop. And so, we've talked about the wetlands down there, we've talked about the slides. I didn't hear any mention about, you know, earthquakes, the land movement. And then, putting this pipe in, what that's gonna do to, the property owners that are down in that area that are already having problems, because, you know, when you're moving land around, digging, the land is moving in other places, and what is that gonna do to those homeowners that are down there?
So,
Sorry.
no, that's.
She points the finger.
No,
Well, because it has to do
That's-
with, it's an
yeah.
engineering question.
Yeah, and that's important, and what I can tell you is these things have been designed and installed, and are being designed and installed as we speak. It's not an easy issue, there's sensitivity from an environmental standpoint that needs to be dealt with. It would certainly not be our intent, it would not be the intent of the geotechnical engineer's recommendations to do something that's gonna result in that type of scenario. But certainly when we're talking about, and again, those alignments are conceptual, that's a line we picked, but some way we'd have to get to the river. And so you're looking at excavating the river as a cheapest alternative. If it's environmentally sensitive, you can do a more expensive directional drill directly into the river. It's going to be that, we're not there yet in terms of having the details of what's going to work, which balances cost versus the environment.
Well, it wouldn't be cost effective, I'm sure, but the best route is 506 down to the I-5 bridge, down to, you know, the water is
They have
moving
right there,
all around.
which is one of the recommendations. If you look on this one here. A
And
little
all-
bit further, it's
Down to
Yeah,
the
which is-
I-5.
So,
right,
yeah,
right there.
I have a question, I just want to clarify one thing for myself.
Not quite as far, but close.
The question is not, will we have to do this if more people come online in Enchanted Valley or whatever? The question is, I'm asking, we have to do this anyway, even if we don't take on one more soul in Vader. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it doesn't, the issue of Enchanted Valley is an important issue, but it really doesn't have any effect on us. We gotta do this, I don't know what we should do, but we have to do it either way. Am I correct? Okay, thank you. I'll make sure I understood that.
here.
You have, I'm looking at, there's such a wide flow rate difference on Noah Claw Creek. It goes from, like you said, right now, we've got a flood stage.
Yep.
You're 1,000 or 2,000 times more than you do at low water.
Yep.
Okay. When you do your criteria on building this thing, what parameters do you have to do? Do you have to do your most amount of water that goes into the system at the lowest water? Are you stuck with that?
So what the receiving water, what the permit limits would be expected to be is done through kind of what's called a regional potential analysis. And the critical flow of the receiving water for that analysis is referred to as the 7Q10. That means for a 10-year interval over that 10-year record of data, here's the lowest 7 continuous days of flow. And that's a value. And so that's going to be low. And then there's, you're allowed a mixing zone, and there are both chronic and acute toxicities. And for low flows, it tends to, there's a number of criteria, and you have to pick the most onerous of that criteria.
Right.
For low flows, it tends to be kind of a percentage of that. I forget what the 7Q10 for Oakwood Creek is, but it's like 7 cubic feet a second or less.
Could be 5.
Would be 5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's,
yeah, I understand that. I do a lot of river running and stuff, so I understand what you're talking about. So the reality is because it is so small, and because you're stuck with being the amount of affluent at its peak, and when it comes into the sewage system in the wintertime is exponential over 10 times. In the wintertime, you get more flow going into your ponds than you do in the summertime on dry season.
and that's
But then you're stuck with that
right.
because it's the worst,
Right.
and you gotta fit the worst with
Yeah.
the worst.
That is, thank you for pointing that out, because what some utilities have done is they've said, okay, we'd like to challenge this, because right now the formulas that you plug in
They're
to
impossible.
do that analysis, it is not necessarily matching up the stream flow condition with the flow that you're gonna receive at that time. And so what some utilities would like to do is develop data that more accurately matches those two. What I can tell you is that if you did that here, we could probably realize a little higher limits, but it's not gonna have a real significant cost impact. I can tell you that.
Because right now, at flood stage, we get as much water going down the Ole Claw as the Cowes River does at low stage. So effectively, you know, you're stuck with the worst scenario.
No, that's a very good point. Let me try to run through the rest of these quickly. I did want to point out, so the recommendations that we made at the council meeting, this was the final slide from the council meeting, was number 1, the outfall of the Cowlitz River alternative was the most cost effective. And it was so, there are a couple of things that we looked at in terms of what the anticipated permit limit would be on the Cowlitz. Based on our current understanding, though, that kind of 3.4 alternative is what we would go with. We have completed the facility plan update in draft form, submit to Ecology for kind of a preliminary review. But for Ecology to approve that, a few additional efforts need to be included before you can go into design. I will say, and I'll talk about those on the next slide, but I will say that a pre-consultation with the federal agencies basically associated with fisheries interests on the Cowlitz River, we have conducted that, and the regulatory representatives from those agencies that were part of that meeting, they're in support of this, just on its surface, because you're taking pollutant loads from a very critical water body in Old Quad Creek and putting it into a water body that's more accommodating because of the flow levels.
Have they suggested where you place it in the Cowlitz?
No, they haven't.
I'd like to add that David's concerns, at that meeting, I was present at it, and I personally have brought up the very same issue that you did, David, so it's not that they're unaware of them. And speaking on behalf of elected officials of the city of Vader, we're environmentally sensitive. I particularly. If I felt that the ultimate outcome was going to be negative on your wetlands and the quality of life that you've got, I wouldn't support it. So.
Thank you.
So where we sit now and what we need to gain approval, which of the facility plan, and that's critical, is Ecology's come back and told us in order to approve the plan, we really need better definition of the alignment. And so again, we showed kind of 2 alignments. There are a whole myriad more of alternatives, and we can talk about those in a few minutes. But in terms of documenting and approving and allowing the city to expend further funds under existing grant loan agreement, we need to finalize and have a better footing on what the actual alignment would be. And so that will involve a couple of efforts. It's talking with all the property owners along those potential routes about an easement acquisition and what a fair easement would represent to those property owners. And when an alignment we think is possible for one of those alternatives, then when we would have people like geotechnical engineers and environmental biologists go and walk those lines and also render conclusions about some of the impacts that would be associated with that. Following that, we need to document by way of an appendix in the facility plan that the State Environmental Policy Act is complete, and so based on this more refined scope of work, we would probably modify a draft SEPA checklist that we have prepared already, and then the city and their planner would reach in a determination on the project and go out for public review. Certainly public comments available during that time. But this process needs to be completed before Ecology can approve the facility plan. And until the facility plan is complete, we can't use those important monies under the current contract for design at that time. And I think there's a time limit on that money as well.
Design funds, yeah. I can't tell you off the top of my head. Children. Probably a couple years.
2017, I guess.
So in terms of the alignment, again, the blue alignments are the ones that we were included in the report. But I want to do this just to emphasize part of how we did this is thinking about what might be most constructible and what might cost the city to lease again. I have to stop every time and think about $4.8 million to a community of 620 people. And so, 230 connections. It's just, it's unfathomable. So this funding package is critical for this being at all viable. But certainly we're not held to that. And you can see there's a wide range. This one far to the north along 506, this would just be one property owner here. This is probably going to be a pretty costly alternative, staying within that road, just knowing what I know about that road. And then there's all sorts of alternatives down this way, where easements, again, for a certain number of property owners would be required. And there's a whole myriad of issues in between. What do we want to look for? We want to try to serve the city and come up with the most cost-effective solution. So we'd start with looking at alternatives that might be the shortest length. But to the extent that consensus building is necessary and environmental and neighborhood concerns are realized, we're open to any of this. What's key is that any of these solutions is going to be able to be eligible to be funded under continuing funding for the program. This project's not going to happen unless funding continues. So
Wouldn't it be a lot shorter to go through Enchanted Valley to the river?
Uh, There are some private properties that need to be crossed there as well. One thing that I haven't, we kind of included this line just because it stays within all city and right-of-way, street right-of-way. But I think there's only one property owner where if you can, I think this knocks off almost 1,000 feet of pipe if we could go up this way. But I've tried to balance the alternatives in these alignments shown, but it's going to be very hard to get an easement for with 20 private property owners. So it's kind of a balance. We're open to anything. I'd like to kind of consider this one. If you can go, this is 9th, is this 8th?
That's 10.
I'm sorry, 10th, yeah. You know, even a more direct route. I'm open to anything, but we have to start the conversation with property owners to see what's going to work for them.
And then
But-
again, down where you have these other 4,
Yeah,
um,
and these are, again, arbitrary here, sorry.
yeah, they're not gonna, you know, just from past experience, working with the city, those people, you know, they didn't want anybody to let the city come down through there, the city's water line, you know? And also, if, you know, anybody that takes a trip down that river, you know, we go quite often every year, and I have several pictures and video of the slide areas, and it is amazing from year to year. There's a house right now that they have brought in big rock to try to save their house from coming down, and you know, it's a high bank, and so you're down quite low, but when you look up there, it looks like it's right on the edge. And they've lost a lot of trees and stuff, so I mean, that whole thing is a real issue.
Yeah, and you know what, our geotechnical engineer is responsible for making recommendations. Suggests these are the soils conditions, stay away from this. I do, you know, there is kind of a difference between slides, which are precipitated by soils conditions, versus bank erosion that can occur on the outer banks of rivers. But our geotechnical engineer, that's their responsibility. If they don't do it right, if they don't recommend the right techniques to go forward with and the right alignment, that's what they're paid to do.
Well, that gets me back to who's responsible if it breaks.
Well, that's a tricky issue. What I can tell you, here's what I can tell you, and I'm of course not helping this, but this portion here would be under very low pressure. The way pipe is made these days, and if we look at a restrained piping system, so fused PVC, or if they are done in sticks, something that restrains each of those joint sections, I think that's pretty foolproof, and I'd be very disappointed if you didn't bury that and stop thinking about it.
So you think PVC is gonna?
If it's laid in the correct ground.
No, that's not PVC.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's a much tougher.
Not that
They use HD pipe.
HDPE,
Yeah.
that's the one that we've, and I can actually show a few slides. So this is
That's
one
it there.
we did across the field, and that's the fusing machine for each of the pipe segments. And so it really becomes one system. So if there is sliding or sloughing, that's intended. The seams are the manufacturer, you know, portrays as strong as the pipe itself.
That's the kind I had to use to come from the Collis River to go to the highway, because it goes all the way uphill. And the old treatment plant was nothing but transite and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And in the wintertime, we'd have to go down there and by hand, because you couldn't get equipment in there. And so I put HD pipe, there's a picture of it right there, from the Collis River up. And, yeah, I guess it's still working.
So there are a couple components to design a pipe, and one is pipe and the integrity of the pipe. But as you point out, soil conditions and wetlands and things, and certainly the way you bed the pipe before you place it on it for the long term is essential too. It's critical. And our geotechnical engineer makes those recommendations. So if you're in peat or swamp or marsh, the contractor has to over excavate and put down pipe bedding that's adequate to accommodate that for the long term.
I have a question. Why can't we take the old water system that Vader used to have and take and pump water into the lagoon and get fresh water all the time in there, and then we wouldn't have to go through all this stuff we're doing now, see? Because we used to take the fire hose, and that was the water we used to have in the city of Vader would come up the Holy Craw Hill, and maybe we could use that if the ecology department would let us use it.
Yeah,
Long bylaw.
yeah.
If it can fly, no one wants to be the first one to do anything. So I understand if you don't have any of those answers, but it's a thought.
Put more water in Old Quarry Creek, right?
Yeah.
Basically.
Basically, mix your water with what you're discharging it to drop your percentages. Your biggest problems are is copper, crying out loud.
Temperature.
It's in temperature. Well, if you've got cold water that's 10 degrees colder, you don't have that problem anymore.
I don't think diluting the receiving water is allowed in the Water Act.
That's the question, isn't it?
And why wouldn't that be? Because of using,
Because the person who wrote it was
about using our resources?
You could stretch it in certain ways, in certain circumstances.
Yeah, you might be able to get something around it, but if you don't ask the question, you never are going to get the answer.
Yeah, it's great defense.
So pipeline construction, this project was, we obtained an easement. This is in Redmond, and this pipe is, I think, actually 20-inch. It's a little bigger. What they had to disturb in terms of the easement width was a little wider because this was kind of swampy wetlands area, and so there had to be pretty substantial dewatering equipment. And so when you see the restored width, this is a little wider than I'd hopefully anticipate for some of the segments of the alignments we're looking at. But this picture is a couple of years ago. There were no special requirements in terms of restoring it, but it's kind of taken on its natural vegetation. The owner allows the utility workers to drive across it. But, the intent would be that whatever alignment was chosen, that it would be restored to at least its existing
So you
condition.
would re-landscape my front yard then?
That is very commonly a part of these.
No,
And mow it every Saturday?
Now, what I can tell you is that whatever alignment, the conditions of an easement are that the utility needs to protect that infrastructure. And so you can't plant big trees back on top of it.
Is this here, picture that you were just showing, is this like?
That's
an
the pipe in the
example?
trench.
That would be,
That's the pipe in the trench, and so for trench safety, so that when workers are down in the trench, the walls don't slough in and people don't get buried. They have these trench policies.
The walls are removed.
Yes. It's just box safety.
So you have personally drove down Enchantment Lane? Because I look at those pictures and you're taking up the whole road to get that down there. I mean, what do you do with that? I know it sounds stupid, but I just,
No.
you know.
They're gonna pave, they're gonna pave the
Are you
road
gonna
back.
give me a paved road back? Pay the taxes on it?
With pavers.
I can tell you that, what I can tell you is within right-of-ways, that's a very common point of easement negotiations is, you know what, you're giving us an inconvenience here. We recognize that.
Yeah. Well, because
And so-
everybody pitches in
Sure.
to pay the taxes on it.
Yeah.
So basically, it's ours.
Yeah, yeah.
And, and each person is, you know, supposed to take care of it,
Yeah,
and I just,
I think you're still down at the bottom line. You gotta get somebody out here to look at these easements, because you can
Yeah.
argue all day long about where it's gonna go, but once they tell you where it needs to go, then you need to start arguing about it. That's the bottom
is
line.
that where we
You
just
don't
bend
know.
over and take it then?
It may be 10 miles south.
Don't know, I might go up a little bit.
Yeah.
I
You really
just
gotta get
agree
somebody
with
out
that.
here and get through that stage.
Yeah,
Well, and plus,
So-
that road over there, it was always my understanding that that road had to be brought up to county specifications.
That's why I did.
yes.
I've already talked to the county, and that's why we don't have, I maintain it, because we don't have blacktop, because it's too narrow.
And that's what
Yeah.
And we're not gonna, all the families gonna build it up to county code, they'll take it over, well, how many hundreds of $1,000s would it cost us to double that width?
We don't want
That,
to dig
we
it
don't,
anyway.
so there you
No,
go. That's what I'm saying, we got too much,
To us.
there's too much tentacles, we just wait until, find out which direction they're going, then we'll
Yeah.
fight them.
Exactly. You gotta figure out where you're gonna lay that.
So, but to your point about, yeah, it's a nuisance during construction. And if you have a thin road, certainly, you know, planning traffic and allowing property owners access to their homes is a part of that consideration. So
We don't want our
there's
cars
a
to.
traffic management plan.
we
Speak
get
for
enough
yourself.
traffic on that road, I have no idea where it goes.
Going down into the river.
It's like checking the river out.
Go down and see that crop down there, and you'll know where it's at.
So, the last thing I'll just show on this slide is, again, there's no painless solution here. There really isn't. We hope that you know we understand that. So it's really gonna be a balance of property owner concerns, of where an easement is attainable, and also considering the environmental impacts, and certainly things like slides and the river are part of that. Certainly as you look at, another reason why these might be a little better is you're actually clearing less riparian section that's currently forested. If you can get down there pretty much without doing much more clearing. We haven't, in our initial discussions, heard any fatal flaw associated with any of these routes. It seems like it's something that on premise, at least the in-water agencies are in favor of doing. But there's a lot to figure out and to learn about site conditions for the potential environment before that's all squared away. This is actually a project that we have a little further north where I think this is going to bid shortly, but it's a cross-section. I apologize, our sub-consultant that does the design for the in-water work, he's out of country right now, and I wanted to get some similar photos for the in-water work and wasn't able to do that, but this is a profile for the design that just shows kind of the heavy rock and riprap that you extend out into the river. The outfall line is there. There's kind of one of these duckbill valves there that kind of cinches on itself, and as the water builds up behind it, some pressure, it forces it open, but water can't go back the other way.
Got that on Rocky Point.
Okay, yeah. And then obviously some screening to prevent blockage within it. That in-water work would be permitted by agencies and would have to occur outside of fish windows when fish runs are done, and depending on how far out into the river you go, it can be more costly and more extensive of a construction period. They can go from anything from sandbagging and getting it close to the banks to, you know, doing sheet piles to floating in a barge and submerging and sinking to pilings that are sunk from the barge at intervals. All that's been done, but the latter is certainly more costly.
If I understand this right, you're gonna be remaking part of the bank, and now there'll be a permanent part of the bank, in which you wanna get far enough back where it won't go behind it and take the whole thing out.
The
Is
bank,
This is the bank on the side of the river?
no, actually, this is kind of the river channel all the way here. The bank might be back here.
Oh,
so,
okay.
yeah.
So this is under the river?
Correct.
So you would drill that rather than excavate it?
what's being planned on this project and what we look at first here is kind of an open cut excavation with dewatering such that you know, don't get sloughing and deterioration and erosion, and replacement with suitable materials such that you don't get erosion down afterwards.
We'd probably keep it washed away.
And again, in regards to the bank, that most cost effectively would be open cut and the bank would be restored with kind of a riprap rock to some degree as well.
Yeah, that's a tough thing on it.
If it is environmentally, if it's environmentally sensitive, we can look at some kind of trenchless technologies, not open cut, but those are more costly.
Yeah. Well, it'd be drilling an 8-inch well.
Yeah, kind of lateral.
Yeah, which you could easily do. That's not hard, yeah.
That's all I had, and I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. We're looking for the easiest solution here, and all of your concerns are you know, of paramount importance to the city. I know that. They're very sincere in trying to find the best solution here.
Where does the outflow have to be located in the river? Does it have to be in the deepest area of the river?
That we'll find out some more details in design. There are different ways where an outfall can be an open-ended pipe, but as you might need it for water quality concerns, it can be kind of take on a diffuser design that disperses it more across the river section. How you extend, how far you extend into the river, that's all going to be a part of more of the discussions with these fisheries agencies.
You have to balance that with maintaining the integrity of the outfall so the river doesn't take, you know, with a big wall.
You'd be surprised how big the rocks are go down the river.
Come across walls. I have a question over reading over 200 page document. I noticed in a lot of places it says South Military. And then in parentheses it says West Side Highway. Now, is that the way it's supposed to be, or I'm missing something? Because South Military is north
One of the
of
same.
506.
It's all referring to West Side. I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, I mean, it's numerous, but at one spot where I was looking, it said South Military, and then in parentheses, said West Side Highway, and so.
It changes name at the highway, right?
Yeah.
Right,
that
South
was-
Military
So
on
I
that
think
side,
that-
and
yeah.
West Side on this highway, on this side, and it's like, well, why are they gonna run it on that side?
Yeah, I think that's probably just the semantics.
Yeah.
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 Does anybody have any questions for the Department of Ecology on this, since we have Al here?
Do you have any recommendations on the placement in the river?
That's I think there's a lot of complication to the project, and I don't have the knowledge nor the expertise to make a call on that at this point, because there's, like Chris was saying, there's a lot of different types of disciplines that have to be brought to bear on this alignment. You know, the geotech, the biologist, probably National Marine Fisheries. We'll be looking at it, and so it's kind of like a technical team effort, really, to come up with the right. Well, plus the public, you know, you guys, you're part of the project too, and so that's kind of, it's a tapestry more than just kind of one person making the call or one agency. So it's a process which will produce an event, which will be the alignment. And everybody's gonna be part of that process. So it's a team effort. That's the way I look at it.
So when will they have, like, the next get together for, I mean, when all of you will get together and then on another public meeting?
So I can say that right now, the schedule for the project would be we need to put a contract for some additional effort in front of Vader City Council. But the immediate scope of that contract is to talk to property owners and try to identify an attainable route. When that attainable route or some combination of potential routes is identified, we send the geotechs, the biologists out there to add in their concerns about those alignments. And if there are no fatal flaws and there's an alignment that looks like it's achievable and a compromise can be reached to all fronts, then you start talking about easements. And that allows the definement of the final construction scope. It allows the facility plan to be completed and approved and design work to start. There's still a myriad of permitting before construction can occur. There's a number of agencies associated with doing work within 200 feet of the shoreline. So there's a lot of permitting and a lot of people will put their eyes on the scope of this project in the future.
Chris, are you thinking that the discussions with property owners regarding easements would be this summer? That kind of time frame? Before that? After that?
I think it needs to be sooner. It's one of the very first elements of what we intend to do next. Again, we need to more readily define the scope of the project for approval of that facility plan. And so
I think they call that, you scratch my back, I'll scratch it. That's what I'm about. We'll help you if you help us.
Joe,
Yes.
Just
All
to
money.
clarify,
All money, that's what it says.
just so that I make sure I'm understanding correctly, in order for the facility plan to be approved by the Department of Ecology, this needs to happen in order for us to go into the design phase. We have, so we have to get the plan approved. And in order to get the plan approved, what do we have to do from now in order to get the plan approved?
we need to finalize that
We have to
alignment.
finalize the alignment.
Right. Finalizing that alignment will allow us to prepare a more finalized SEPA checklist
Right.
for the city's planner to render a determination on, a public review comment. The completion of that SEPA process needs to be documented and included in the facility plan, and that allows approval of the plan.
And that will be everything that we need to get the approval.
Well, the federal agencies will have to weigh in on the plan too, as part of the environmental review process. National Marine Fisheries, for example, EPA. That'll be run through our agency lead, Liz Ellis, and she'll run up the flagpole to the agencies, they'll review it, make comment if there's any mitigation or whatever that has to be done. But if you take a wetland, maybe you gotta produce another wetland somewhere else, to trade, things like that, mitigation.
We don't have an owl
So
Pardon?
Hopefully you don't have an owl somewhere.
Or an eagle.
Eagles,
So,
we do.
Yeah, I know, we got eagles. Shh, not so loud.
Go ahead, Joe.
so the biologist and the geologist and all those kind of tests, those professionals that will come in, will that be then before the finalization of the plan?
And I'm gonna say that's gonna be a phased process. They will be a part of an initial assessment that says, you can't do this because here's the fatal flaw. And that's the level that will be done to facilitate approval of the facility plan. There are certain things that the biologist, the geotechnical engineer are involved in that necessitate the design be developed further. A biological assessment on the river can't be done until the design's gone a bit more, it's developed a little more. And so there'd be continuing work that results in things like this biological assessment and an opinion of
So
that.
they'll become more detailed as the
Right.
design phase goes on. Okay.
So, but as right now, you're saying we have to have the alignment, and so you get the people to say, yeah, okay, and then they say, no, you can't do it here, then you gotta go back to another route, get the approval. What?
You do.
Okay, so I just getting this straight in my mind. Your first objective is to get easement and permission so you have a route. And then you take the route to all these agencies and the Royal Astronomer and whoever else and get them to say, okay, you can use this route. If they say, no, you can't, then you have to pick another route, get permission from the property owners
If
and
there's
start
a fatal
over.
flaw to it.
Is that kind of,
Yes,
okay,
yes.
Our eminent domain.
right.
So you don't have, you're not going to look at where you're going to be discharging into the river until you have a way to the river, is that it?
No, I think there'll be some consideration of where in the river it's discharged to, along with that alignment, finding that alignment.
So like your biologists and geotech guys are maybe gonna go out to the river and say, okay, ideally,
Sure,
these are the best locations.
sure, yep.
And then you look at the route to connect the 2 points.
So is that saying we need them first for us to pick the route?
You would think so.
I think your
So-
sub-consultants have an idea of the kinds
Yeah.
of locations that would be approved.
Yeah, for instance, one consideration, and in our initial discussions, this topic did come up with the fisheries, the federal agencies, is there's a sandbar here. And discharging inside of that sandbar is not ideal. That's where a lot of the fish are gonna hang out when they're making their runs.
Yeah,
So
me
that's
too.
in Utah, sure.
No, that's where I hang out.
Yeah, so
All
that's
the time.
something that we'd like to avoid in finding a solution that's works for everyone. That's part of discussing and putting things on the table. There's gonna be disadvantages, and we're not gonna come up with an ideal solution.
Well, it's probably gonna be kind of interactive too. I mean, you got the
Absolutely.
knowledge is saying, well, here, here, and here, and then you got the property owner saying, no, yes,
Yeah.
So you're gonna have an interaction there, between who's okay with it, who's not, and where the biology is and where it's not. So it's kind of a process.
The
Like
one,
kind of
yeah.
working together, the hard and loves.
The one thing that I ask your understanding as property owners on is that, again, the city of Vader can't reach into their bank account and pay for this. And so to the extent that we're looking at solutions, we need to assure ourselves that whatever the scope of that improvement is, that finalized alignment, it's eligible for funding. Otherwise this project just can't be done.
Well, in the sense that we've reached a logical conclusion. Any last questions?
I'd just like to thank everybody so I can go.
I'll do that for you. Let me commend all of you. I mean, we didn't know what to anticipate, but we did anticipate that there would be concerns and that there would be some disgruntlement. And so, but I commend you for your respect and civility. It's fantastic. And hopefully you'll come back to when we have more specifics to bounce off of. And bring your friends and neighbors too. So, one last comment from the press.
I was just curious, I understand there's a lot of balls in the air right now, but when, either like as far as a general timeline or where in the process of things, we expect to have another meeting like this scheduled?
Well,
As soon as they find something out.
Yeah, we're gonna put the boots on, I think, and we'll be walking the riverbank. So maybe a month or two.
Do you think in a month or two, there might be another public meeting for us?
I think we're at a critical period where, as we start talking with property owners, we need to hear the concerns and let that schedule dictate to some extent.
So how do you go about talking to the property owners? Do you go door to door, or, what is your process?
We haven't discussed that in great detail. Door to door has been done, but I think,
Who has shotguns and who don't?
yeah, exactly.
That's the real concern.
But I think maybe developing groups and trying to hold joint meetings for any given alignment for all the property owners that would be a part of that might be a logical thing to try to get a study session of all those people together.
Is there a way we could talk to the people who will be narrowing down the location of the outfall?
Like to give your input
Yeah.
and concerns?
Exactly.
Can he provide that to you to give to your sub-consultants?
We wanna know where they live.
Well, no, David, I'm sure, David, you're thinking, you want to let them know that people go out on the sandbar and go fishing and hang out, right? You want to let them know certain anecdotal information about the shoreline.
Right, yeah, I mean, I know that the city has to go into the counties, I completely understand that, and I feel for them, I understand they're in a difficult situation, but at the same point, I didn't have any hand in creating it, and it's been a long, long time coming. And I want to see them get through it, but I don't want to be the one who has to pay for it. I don't think that's
And you don't want it done
And you want to make sure that the sub-consultants have as much information as possible to be making
to
the
make the best
recommendations,
choice,
right?
right?
Sure. And that your voice is critical and it's a component of the right solution. Absolutely.
Plus, I've been there 25 years, so I have a pretty good feel for what the river does.
So is that correct advice, Chris, that you would want them to give that directly to you, or do you want them to give that input via the city to you? How do you
Yeah,
want that
I
to go?
think as a starting point, certainly to me, that needs to be put on the table as considerations. Your knowledge over the years of that river and your observed changes to what it does seasonally, and your ideas about an outfall location, both longitudinally and latitudinally, that might work. Where do you think you'd have concerns about it being a viable solution?
I got one thing that's talking about where he lives actually, where that arrow is. Is your sandbar you talked about?
Yes.
Holding up in a pond, which is a slack water,
Yeah,
with a straightaway coming up past where we get our water.
okay.
Those two items are right where they built a boat launch. Now that island's right there you're talking about, and right below it is,
So here's the island here.
yeah,
So
it's up a little further. It's not right there, but it's right in there.
okay. There's a boat launch there?
Well,
There
yeah.
was.
There
Well,
was.
it's
Washed out.
Yeah, wash it out.
Okay.
But that's the island at which he lives, which is right down that straight line, you go right down to the river. The one that, the other one's ours. But anyway, you come down, you drop down to Daryl's place and he hits the river right there. And then if you go on up the top up there, that's where you're talking about where we get our water,
Mhm.
which is the upper part of the river. Where you're looking at right straight across from Chandler Lane, comes on that blue lower one,
Right,
which is these folks here that are talking.
yeah.
And goes down to the river right there, right in that head of that arrowway in there is where this gentleman lives, and there's your island that's there. And you walk right over to it in the summertime,
Well, and it
It's a
used
bar.
to be like
a big
a,
bar. But
yeah,
then it's a
and-
big hole,
Okay.
and then the big fishing holes are all down, all the fish holes up there before they take a run up to right up the river.
Okay, so there's another bar that
Yeah.
maybe doesn't necessarily break the surface here, or?
No, it's on the surface, it's on except for high water. I mean, it's like right now, it's underwater, but then
Okay.
when it gets down to another 3 or 4 feet, you're right at the top of it, then you can walk out there and picnic on it, and because the rapids come right up through there.
Okay.
There are 2 places you come up with the boat, and he knows, because people go down that straight for the boat, and it trickles, but it's also where the fish hole is.
So
Make the run.
I want to get back to your comment, David. You said washed out here.
Yes.
And certainly by the geography of the river, you wouldn't expect an outer bank influence to cause erosion there. So that, to me, indicates that there could be some soil integrity issues there. So I think that as we bring our geotechnical engineer to do his field reconnaissance, including conversations with the property owners during that time would be a good idea.
Geotechnically, we have awful soil here. It's very dense clay with almost no rock in it. That just doesn't last. That river should move all over the place.
Not a riprap.
Yeah.
I have,
Nearing the end, your last question?
okay, it's directed to you, Mayor. And it's not a hostile question, it's an honest question. And I think a good answer to it, if you can't give it tonight, but later might put people's mind at ease a little bit. and forgive the phrase, but I don't know what else to call it, what type of malpractice insurance do these companies have? So if there is a problem later on down the road because of the decisions they've made and the direction they've gone, the city, the homeowners have some recourse financially, or if we get in trouble with government agencies because of the decisions they've made. I don't know if they're right, wrong, or indifferent, but what kind of monetary compensation would the city have? What kind of insurance do they carry?
Well, we are covered by the Risk Management Services Agency, which is an insurance company that's sponsored by the Association of Washington City. And because we are a city, we have access to them. And so they would provide insurance coverage for us.
And then they would go after the parties they've held
I've been
responsible,
told
like car
that if,
insurance?
for example, an engineer does some contract work for a city,
Mhm.
and it's discovered 15 years later that it was done in violation of existing codes, that they are subject to potential legal action, even 10, 15, 20 years later. So that's why it's incumbent upon the engineering companies that they're going to adhere to all of the violations. So that's how I answer that question.
Thank
And
you.
it was, I think someone else asked, well, who'd be responsible to fix the pipe? It breaks full of city would. That's my
She
immediate
laughed.
response.
She walked out.
She she's your neighbor to talk to. But, so that's a good question. And, thank you for that.
What's to keep, you know, like, what happened with the water system?
Sure.
What's to prevent that same thing happening to your wastewater treatment plant, and who takes care of it? Because,
Sure.
you know, I with city water now, it's been turned over to the county. And
Yeah. Well,
so,
that's not as onerous a situation as we're making it seem. I mean, we experienced in 2009 some pretty severe financial challenges that were the resultant of a number of factors, but primarily an employee who
well, I
concerned.
recall all
But
that. But
sure,
I just want to know what, you know, if that same thing could happen, what,
well, it's highly unlikely, but just because the city of Vader, since that time period, we went through 2 years of negotiation with that water system. It's in receivership, but we are represented by probably one of the preeminent legal minds in the state of Washington, Joe Rayberger, who's with Cascadia Law out of Olympia. And we have built into that receivership paperwork guarantees that if we meet, we're going to get that system back. One of the main criteria is that we pass 2 consecutive state audits without findings. And I don't know if you've observed in the newspaper that we just completed that audit process for a 2-year period without findings. And so currently the city of Vader is being administrated more effectively, probably, they probably argue with me in this, than our neighboring cities are. We're operating in the black, and the water system is being well handled.
Well, I was just gonna add that part of the things that the city has to do to be able to get the water system back is to show that we can handle the wastewater utility system properly. And this is part of that. We have to show that we can make any corrections that need to be made and stay within the permit regulations for our waste treatment plant. If we can do this and complete these tasks, then we will be showing that we are responsible enough to have the water system back. And so that's another aspect
A
of
lot
it.
of the pre-existing impressions of the city of Vader have changed dramatically in the last 5 years. If you were to come to the city of Vader city council meetings, I think you'd be startled, because when we first moved here 8.5 years ago, I did come to the city council meetings, and there has been a complete paradigm shift. And the competency level is improved dramatically. But that's just talk. I mean, I'd invite you to come and see. And everything that is done in the city, if you are concerned and want to get documentation of what we're talking about, everything we do is transparent and subject to Open Public Meetings Act. And every piece of paper that we produce is accessible to members of the public. So I'm extremely confident that as we continue the course, we're going to be able to, we will get our drinking water system back. And we'll probably get it back within the next 2 to 3 years. And so in combination with this, we're establishing a potential for community development. Whatever that vision might turn out to be, we're trying to be futuristic in this. We're not stumbling over ourselves to try and become the next Tacoma or even Napa. We'd like to remain a very quiet and tranquil, family-friendly little city nestled in the woods that can maintain our utilities and do it in a way that's financially and budget sensitive to the residents.
Well, you know, the water quality has really improved since Lewis County took over. We
Yeah.
hardly ever have it shut off, and it
Yes.
tastes better,
Yes.
and better pressure,
Exactly.
and we're not getting billed for things that weren't our fault.
But let me be clear here that they are operating the system that we fixed. We spent $1.4 million that we got from the grant and some loan funding to fix the pipes. And so that's why you're not having any breaks. The county hasn't come and done some.
Well, they
magic
put a
wonder.
valve up there so we didn't have to suffer every time you guys broke down then.
Yeah, well, we paid for that. That was $5,000.
We're paying for it
Thank
too.
you.
We're paying almost double what we paid before for water, but so I figure we pay for that now too.
Well, yeah, it comes out of all of the users.
Right.
And we are very proud of our water. We're the only community that has access to the Cowlitz River. And one of the key elements of that agreement was that we're not going to give up our water rights to access to the Cowlitz. It's like oil in today's world, even though it's flood.
It's gonna get worse.
Exactly.
The water's gonna get
So,
more expensive.
We think that we live in a very wonderful area. We live here in this community and we love it as much as you love your properties. And so I hope that with this sense of combined vision, we can improve the quality of life for everybody and maybe move past some of the old perceptions of Vader. And we don't like to feel like we're enemies of anybody, we are neighbors. So I hope that we can take that attitude as we move forward. But defend your concerns. We're not asking you to let go of it. Just if we can just work together and be civil. And nobody's mentioned, well, would we get money is always, like you say, is always a driving issue. We're not coming in with a bulldozer to take it, and there'd be some financial compensation for it that we would anticipate that you would ask for and get, and maybe that would soften the negotiating process a bit. So
You get to live on that island?
anyway, I think thank you for being here, and I hope that we will come back for round 2. Not like a boxing round. Thank you all. We'll return your meeting at declared at 7:48.